All right, so the launch we've been waiting for. So I want to launch to the moon, so I go out into map mode, and I set the moon as my target. So relative inclination, which MechJeb can tell you in a custom window. Hopefully you know how to create custom windows. They're really, really useful. So it tells me that I'm currently way out of plane. I really want relative inclination to approach 0 degrees. I think I'm launching from Florida in Murica, and I think the closest you can get to the plane of the moon is ½ degree. So I'm going to accelerate time until I get to that point, until I get in the plane of the moon. So let's see. There we go. We got our sunset. Oh, and it's approaching. It approaches. Now, usually, once I get close to that, just so I don't have to do this each time if I end up doing a revert, I'll usually go out to the KSC campus, come back, and that will reset the timer. I wish there was a mod or a quick tool to like change what point in the launch it'll revert back to, custom revert points or something that I could hotkey. If you guys know about that, a mod like that, let me know. But it would be handy in a case like this, which I run into a lot. So there we go. So my relative inclination is now about ½ degree. And let us launch. So unfortunately, it's going to be a night launch, so it'll be a little dark, but whatever. I will live. All right, so we're down to, again, 0.4 time acceleration. So I usually just use a little bit of this 1, 2, 3, 4 time warp in order to accelerate through some of this, the early part of this launch. So important parameters I like to watch during launch are time to AP. Kind of gives you how much time you have to correct things until you're starting to head back downhill. The pitch of the rocket, which right now pointed straight up, is 90, and my AP, which is the second parameter here, and like the full orbital characteristics. Okay, so launching from the dark side, unfortunately. All right, so straight up, going 100 meters per second now, so I'm going to start pitching. My usual go-to standard is I wait until, like, you want easy variables to tweak, so you're only changing 1 or 2 things when you're trying to get a good curve for your rocket. So I usually go to 50 meters per second, which is often, like say for the Saturn V, like you might be around 30 seconds into the flight, and then pitch over to 88 or 87. So here, because I waited a little longer, I'm pitching over a little more to get that. And then once I see in the little nav HUD here that we're more or less aligned, I'll tell it to follow it down, so it'll kind of manage its own gravity turn for the most part, and then I can watch the precise pitch through here. So around burnout of the booster stages, I want through experience with this rocket specifically, say I know I want to have an AP of about 180 to 200 kilometers, maybe a little less than that. And so I'll be trying to manage for that. It can be really difficult, but it takes experience because you're getting most of your actual delta V from a stage right near the end of a stage. So you just, through experience, you watch the numbers and how they develop. That's why it's good to kind of pay attention to a couple of different values. I've got my crew of 3 here. Bob of the original 3 Kerbals has survived. Look at all my beautiful mods. My RAM usage hasn't even turned red yet. How about that? From the one revert I did. And still at just time warp acceleration 1. I've already gained a little bit of time somehow. It's up to the rate at which time is passing is up to about 50% of if it was 1-to-1. All right, so I'm past the max Q. Dynamic pressure is starting to come down. I feel like this is not too bad of an orbit. So, I subconsciously had tweaked this down a little bit because I felt I'm angling a little higher than I want to. Because ultimately, just generically, if you're trying to learn or work with a new ascent path, I usually aim for like being at a pitch of 45 degrees at first stage burnout, but obviously that depends on a ton of factors. So it's not perfect thing to aim for, but it's not bad either. Okay, so I like to roll this so that these boosters are to the side, just because I like the way that looks when they stage. roll position 0 is this way. If I wanted them kind of the same symmetry but reverse the other way, I'd change that to roll 180. And then my beautiful Pyros rockets. So I love all the numbers, so I know there's just not a lot of videos that show off all the numbers while they're going on, like even just with all the nav HUD and stuff I have here, a lot of that just gets hidden for, you know, graphical beauty. But I want people to be able to, you know, ask the technical or numerical questions, or, you know, kind of be able to reproduce what I'm doing. So my core stage, great efficiency, lower thrust, amazing thrust from these side boosters. There we go. So as you can see, I'm starting to pitch up there. Usually I do most of my attention during a launch like this goes to managing my relative inclination. And the way I do that is by tweaking the yaw back and forth to, oh, clearly went the wrong way, to bring that back as close as I can to 0 during launch. Because, you know, aerodynamic forces and such will force you into whatever path you're heading down, you know, whatever heading you're going down as you pitch down. And so I can just tweak the yaw a little bit. So I love SmartAss so much for controlling these, because just these tiny tweaks beyond what's going on to control what's happening. All right, so stage is about to burn out. These guys hit, what is it, 3.8 Gs of thrust, and boom, knock the boosters off. So that's the lovely SLS, the SSTU separators, which work really well apparently for these heavy boosters, which I'm glad to see. And since everything in that staging went nice, I can jettison that, which is good because I never actually set it up to actually save my Kerbals, although it's entirely possible. I love that that's entirely possible with this SSTU pack and FASA. You can actually legitimately save your Kerbals by making good use of that. So now the whole name of the game is managing AP. So I've played with a bunch of different tricks. So let's say a Saturn V, I'd normally like have my AP a bit lower than that, like let's say 160 kilometers, and then I would just follow just prograde, orbital prograde all the way up. Because of the high thrust of those stages, that works really well, because then I just tweak the pitch of my rocket a little bit once I get up there to kind of stay near. So it's just really straightforward. I love that about a Saturn V launch. You know, targeting your final altitude of your orbit. So here, I'm pitching way down because I want to end up at an orbit. 180 is too low. It just doesn't give you enough time to play with these low thrust weight ratio stages. Like, look, I'm still well below thrust weight ratio of 1. So I'm pitching down a bit. I want to aim to hit, say, 240 kilometers, something like that, of AP. And that's just a bit of experience in fiddling with what my pitch is here. I'm doing it manually, just because that's easier to do subconsciously. But usually, again, I do it with SmartAss, whether it's by tweaking, following the surface prograde or the orbital prograde, whatever. And I'm just yawing a bit and, you know, change my heading a little bit, because see, now you see the relative inclination to the moon is coming down, just a little bit at a time. So I just want it to be, you know, near 0, but really, even if I was off by a couple of degrees, it's no big deal. It's not going to have a huge impact on where I end up with relative to the moon. I'll still be able to get to the moon. Drink my tea. So my time to AP is coming down. So as that comes down, kind of you're working, I think of it as working with a shorter lever arm. So this number is going to be decreasing, going to be increasing by smaller and smaller amounts. So like if I were to pitch up, even though I've got such a low thrust weight ratio, it's because I'm so far away from AP that such a little bit of pitch and force is still making this decrease, you know, slower than it would otherwise if I was pitched to just 0 and I wasn't adding any more vertical velocity. So I'm still losing vertical velocity, still coming towards the AP. You can see that AP is still increasing, and I want to aim for, like I said, 240 would be ideal, but it looks like I might hit around that. It looks like I'm doing pretty good with that goal. But really, I love hand flying rockets. Like, I know you can write, well, other people can write cost programs, KOS. I cannot, and I'm just not interested enough in learning, you know, kind of a whole new language and tools. I tried a bit, but even just figuring out a little bit of the code to control the different axes of the rocket, just I wasn't interested. I love to hand fly it, so I'm okay with doing that. It's only for like some realism overhaul work where I'd like to automate it a little more, and Smartass lets me do that too. Really nice. Okay, so a minute away from AP. I thought I'd use time warp acceleration more, but I'm explaining more than I had expected to. Let's see. I haven't even burned out this core stage. So you get a huge amount of oomph from this core stage because it's it's a relatively light giant tank, and it's got amazing specific impulse. So it's going to get us most of the way towards orbital velocity, which is absolutely necessary with like a heavy payload and this upper stage, because as you can see, the next stage we're going to starts with a thrust weight ratio of 0.2, which is astoundingly low for me, in my opinion. But as long as you're near orbital velocity, and it only has to burn for a couple of minutes to get you into orbit, it's remarkably like a lot of modern upper stages. They've just made these intelligent optimizations where you're trading off, you have a lower thrust weight ratio than say if we had a J2X or something else, a heavy set of engines with more thrust, because then you're dragging less dead weight into orbit, right? If you don't strictly need the extra thrust to achieve your mission, then what's the point of carrying it along? And for me, that would be to make it hand fly a little easier. Because I do want to kind of fiddle with SSTU to make something that's a bit more like the Constellation hardware, right? Where you've got where you do have the higher thrust upper stage, because I really value that. So I'm approaching AP, so now kind of the strategy entirely changes. So I've still got 2.5 minutes to burn with this stage. Now, my next goal that I'm aiming for, so I was managing the AP and pitch and everything such that I'd be at about this altitude that I want to be at. Not too high, not too low, because if I lob it out too high, think about it this way, you're kind of paying to drag all that fuel up to a higher altitude, the gravity well, before you burn it. So whereas if you're burning it at a lower altitude, you'll get more out of it because you didn't have to carry that fuel so high before you burned it. So now I'm heading down, but that's okay. As you see, my thrust weight ratio is going to keep increasing. So my goal is to get my AP up to time to AP, like I want to be heading uphill when the stage burns out, and I want to have about a minute to AP, about that. 1 to even 2 minutes would be nice, but it's because I'm the next stage, the first few minutes that it burns, it's just not going to be able to change that time to AP much at all, like unless I pointed it straight up. So that's kind of the trick or secret I find with these larger rockets. Why, like right off the ground, they're pointed more towards straight up than you'd expect sometimes, and then they pitch way far over, so they do some of these weird tricks. So the reason for that is so that when your main stage burns off and you've got your really light upper stage, you still have AP ahead of you, so you're not falling downhill and trying to have to kind of rescue yourself to give yourself vertical speed with that pathetically low thrust weight ratio upper stage. It makes it hard to hand fly, but there are good reasons to design rockets this way. Oh, and my memory usage is starting to creep up, but I don't believe I'll get a crash. It's weird. I don't remember changing any mods in the last day or two, but previously I could get like 5 reverts. So I usually like to do this little bit of tweaking using these tools, but hand flying is a little less precise, but I find it a little more fun. So I'll just do that throughout this video. So see, I'm starting to head back uphill. You can see vertical speed coming up. Now I've only got 30 seconds left until the stage burns out, so I really need to make that count. So right near the end, what I do, let me know if you have way better strategies, but I'll pitch up quite a bit during these last couple seconds, because then boom, I level off, and now my time to AP is just climbing like mad, because now I've got a thrust weight ratio of 2.5. So you burn out, this thing gets lobbed like 1,000 tons by that first stage, and by the time it starts to burn out, it's burned off 2/3 of its mass, and that's why it goes through such a big change in G-force. All right, so I'm getting tons of time to AP, and you can see my AP starting to push out like mad now, 2:45. And yeah, I've got my minute. I don't think I've ever given myself that full amount of time. I've said I want it, but I've never actually given it to myself. So this is what I find the coolest about SSTU. Ready? All right, so stage, boom. I was able to throw off that first stage, and these engines are extending out. and they light, and then again, and drop that off. I didn't think it would be possible with SSTU. I've seen some other packs do that, but that auto-generated shroud that SSTU has, it's one of its cool hallmark features, one of its many cool hallmark features, just dropped off like you'd want it to. And we've got the lovely real plume here. So we're pushing 200 tons with half the thrust, a little less than half the thrust of a single J2. But we'll actually be pushing more payload to the moon. And that's just the modern tricks in design allowing us to do that. So jettison the side panels. Sorry, it's a night launch. I might just do a daytime launch at some other point just to show it off in a bit more beauty. But the goal is to allow you to reproduce this. I'm turning on some of the life support stuff because I've got TAC, fairly okay configured for this. I'm not going to put out the solar panels, and you'll see in a later video why. It just makes the docking a bit more hazardous and dangerous. So these engines get a pretty good amount of efficiency, way better than the J2 did. The ones actually used on the exploration upper stage might be a bit better. I haven't researched that since we set these up so long ago for SSTU realism overhaul. So okay, time to AP. It's decreasing, but I'm actually doing okay. So I've got, oh man, so it was a bad launch. I'll actually have to use HyperEdit to give myself a little more fuel. But I assure you, if I do a better launch, like I burn more of the fuel further down in the gravity well, I'll have a better launch time. But here, so I want to leave by MechJeb here the vacuum. I'd want to leave 3,100 or 3,300 fuel left over, and I'm not going to get that delta V left over because that's what I need to do the translunar injection. And because I can see, I'm used to aiming for an orbital velocity of about 7,600 meters per second, and I'm 800 away from that. I can see that I'm too close, but that's okay. So with this stage, I mean, I don't see the response in the numbers, but I have some understanding of what's going on. So even though I'm pitched way more up here, my time to AP just isn't responding as much as I'd like it to. So I usually, because your heading changes as you've been flying for longer, I usually use SVEL. Let's see, 10, just as an estimation, to keep my heading just above this without having to change the heading the whole time. I wish I just had an easy way to reset all the numbers in there, because when I switch over to modes, it remembers the values I had last time I launched, because I do change these as I proceed through the launch. So this stage is, I find it slow, boring, but I hand fly because I hand fly. I still love how the plume still looks not bad while you time warp. So that's what this beautiful plume looks like at normal time acceleration, and it's only using 2,000 particles. Not too bad, so it still would look pretty good even if you run at 1,000 particles. And time warp 2 still looks pretty good. It's got those 2 bands, and then at 3 it's still got the 1. And then at time warp 4 you just get that light one, which you can't see in the daylight. But still, I really like the real plumes for these. Felger did an amazing job on those. Kudos to all who work on smokescreen and on the real plumes. And I believe I set these up from this, but it feels like so little work because Felger made such great templates to work with. Okay, so there we go. So I'm heading down now, but that's okay because I'm fairly close to my orbital velocity. I can head down for a little bit, but I really need to manage that because this can't provide that much push. The thrust of this stage is not going to, it's not going to be like that previous stage where we went from 0.8 to 3. It's still going to be pretty light push by the time we get to orbit. So I don't want to let this vertical speed I don't want to be heading downhill more than 100 meters per second or something. And that's just a limitation because this has a light upper stage. You can play with that way more, with a lot more of these parameters in hand flying these things. If you've got more thrust, I do that all the time with, say, a Saturn IB, which I find really interesting to fly just because it was such a challenge to learn. And I like to fly some of the other historic rockets like the Deltas and Atlases and such that have lighter thrust upper stage based on the RL10 variants because it's such an interesting challenge. But yeah, just like to figure out the best kind of consistent way to hand fly these historic rockets, or real designed rockets, to get good payload capacity. So yeah, unfortunately going to have to use a little HyperEdit with this launch. I might relaunch again, I don't want to hide that from you guys, just to get, so I don't have to do HyperEdit. But I mean, either way it's cheating, so I may as well just use HyperEdit. But it absolutely can be done. My last flight with this, I had tons to spare. Oh, and I think because it showed my name there, I lost my targeting on the moon. There we go. Target the moon again. Yeah, I feel like I want to do this launch again to, yeah, I probably will post this up because, again, there's no reason not to, right? The feedback would always be good. But I might redo this video and try to keep it a bit shorter by using a bit more time more. But I also really want to show the technique that I personally use. So if anybody can learn from it, they can. If anybody is like, oh, how is he still using this terrible old crappy strategy? Here's other tricks you can use. So uphill I go. So my vertical speed is gradually increasing. So I'm getting pretty close to orbit. Maybe I will have enough. I'll be really close for the TLI. My goal was, like with building up this craft, was to get something quite close to what the SLS actually, even the heavier SLS, like Block 2 or maybe Block 3 will be, but still able to push the actual Altair mass, because the key was to get this Orion and the service module are all the real masses, but Altair kind of built using the SSTU parts, and I got it to 45 tons, which is what Altair was meant to be. The Constellation era lunar lander, which, according to the wiki page, if that program had continued, would have been landing on the moon in, I think, next year, which on one hand would have been really cool, to have humans sent back to the moon doing science there again, but on the other hand, I'm not convinced of the long-term human habitation of the moon. What's the commercial or human value of keeping people on the moon? Although if you just give NASA more money, I'm sure they'll come up with cool things. Whether they decide that it's more in-space stuff, or on the moon or on Mars, in space, low Earth orbit or beyond, like asteroids and whatnot. All right, so I'm heading uphill, probably a bit too much now, but whatever. And I'll just tell it to go prograde. Oh, and I've been clicking too fast, but so relative inclination, I'm still really close to the moon by relative inclination, which was my goal. So I'm happy with that. All right, so I'm approaching orbit, almost there. Yeah, I burned a little too much delta V, but we'll survive. Kind of curious. I might try to do it with a correction using the Orion, because that would be really cool, in my opinion. Okay, so I'm trying to aim for something circular-ish. Like, that's why I kind of want to aim to be at 220 to 250. A little lower is better, because again, you waste less of your energy hauling your mass to a little higher orbit than you need. Because this is kind of similar in some ways to the Saturn V mission design, where the whole thing launches a single piece into low Earth orbit, and then short check out a couple of orbits and out to the moon. You don't need to be in a high parking orbit, like something like the ISS, where it's going to be up there for some cargo is going to be up there for a long time, waiting for other cargo to come up. There we go. So I just throttle down, and real fuels kills it. Still got plenty of ignitions on this thing, because we'll need one to go to the moon. So even now, thrust-to-weight ratio of 0.26. So the engine bells cool off, which I think looks cool. All right, so I will, in my next video, either just do a relaunching of this and eventually later delete this video with a better, shorter launch. Oh man, looks really nice, doesn't it? Or it will be a docking in sunlight after the TLI burn. All right, so thanks for watching. Goodbye.